Hello and welcome to my higher level online chess course. Now, I think you've all met me. I'm Marcus Gosling. I'm a chess teacher, and I'm going to present to you some hopefully higher level ideas and concepts. Now, I guess the question is, what makes a player higher level? So, for example, you've passed beginner standard, you perhaps a little stronger than intermediate, and now there's the advanced level. Now, intermediate players, they tend to be aware perhaps of some tactics, so things like forks, skewers, pins, discovered attacks, but they're not always able to put them into practice. So I think one difference is a higher level player is unlikely to miss a tactic. But I think also stronger players have a better understanding of strategy. There's a difference between tactics and strategy, which I'll go into probably next lesson, go into that in a bit more detail. But first of all, I just want to quickly outline what to expect in this course. Now, it's important that you actually watch this video when you're feeling awake, when you're able to concentrate fully. The reason is that hopefully you'll get a lot out of it, but it should be quite challenging. I want you to be able to learn something every lesson. And hopefully then your chess will progress as a result. If you're doing stuff that you already know and understand, then it won't quite have the same effect on you. Okay. What we'll do is we'll start off with a kind of puzzle or a scenario, I guess, and that'll be like a warm-up. Then we'll go into a more complex idea, maybe some kind of endgame idea, or some kind of nuance in the opening, or maybe something quite impressive that you might see in the middle game. I'm going to share my screen now so you can see what I'm looking at, and we can try to assess this position. Whoa, and the stockfish is already on. Okay, no, it's not. You'll see me here, but don't worry, don't look at me, you can look at the board. Now, this is a game from the women's candidates match. Now, the candidates tournament is something which takes place every couple of years to decide the challenger for the World Championship. Now, obviously you got the World Champion, but you've also got someone who needs to challenge that person. So there's normally around 8 players. Many of them are very, very strong. Who basically fight it out to become the challenger for the World Championship. This is an example for one of the games from the women's candidates tournament. I think it was a couple of years ago it happened. And so white is somebody called Alexandra Karyachina of Russia, and black is Valentina Gunina. You can look that game up if you want to. I think it was in 2019. So look that up on chessgames.com if you like. Now, I'm not going to give you any clues because you're supposedly higher level players. I'm not going to say anything. I'll give you any clues regarding what you've got to do. All you know is that it's white's move, okay, and you have to find a particularly strong continuation. So pause the video and see if you can work out what I mean. If any of you are struggling a little bit, I'll give you a very small indication, and it involves this pawn. Notice that this pawn is very close to getting to the end of the board, and therefore becoming a queen, most likely. And if we can actually do that, then we will most likely win the game quite easily. At the moment, this rook is stopping us from getting to the end. So therefore, the clue is how do we solve this? How do we get the rook? How do we stop the rook from taking our pawn or preventing us getting a queen? Now, if you saw this move, well done, because it's a very clever idea, and it's something called interference. Interference. Now, you might get that on an old TV or maybe an old radio. Basically, it's when you can't really see or hear something properly. So in this position, black's pieces will be interfering with each other when they capture. Now let's imagine that black captured with the king. Well, then we have quite an obvious move. We have pawn up, and we check the king, and we will probably win this game, I would say, quite easily. Okay, so that's what would happen if black took with the king. Yes, the question is now what would happen if they took, or she took, with the rook, and see if you can spot the solution. Okay, I know it sometimes comes up on the right hand side, but try to avoid looking at this area on the right hand side. I can't really do much about that, unfortunately. The answer is this. It is a skewer, because we're attacking a higher value piece. Behind it is a slightly lower value piece. This king has to move. There's no point blocking with the bishop, of course. King has to move. And then, of course, we can get rid of the rook. And this is, as it says on the right-hand side, a winning position because of this. There we go. And although this game actually lasted another 20 moves or something, you know, it was still a win for white. And basically, white had to use both the king and the queen to force the black king to the side of the board. Okay. So well done if you spotted that. I'm now going to go on to something a bit more complex. Now, I'm going to show you this position here. This is from a tournament which took place in 1936 in Nottingham, okay, in England. And it's between Sarlo Floor and somebody called Vidmar. I think he's called, I can't remember his first name, but Vidmar. So you can look that up if you want. Floor Vidmar, 1936 on chessgames.com. The end game, especially for higher level players, is more and more important. The reason is that if you're playing a stronger player, then they're essentially less likely to make serious mistakes. So the game will progress beyond not only the opening and the middle game, but it will reach the end game in a fair, I would imagine, a fairly level position. Now, generally, one side will have perhaps a small advantage, either in material, so perhaps an extra pawn or something, or maybe a bit of extra space. But more than likely, one side will have perhaps extra activity for their pieces. Notice the value of this rook compared to its counterpart, this rook here. Okay, this rook has a lot of space it can access. This rook here is unfortunately tied to its c6 pawn here, which means that, as you might imagine, white has a bit of an advantage here. Also, something that we should consider just before we look at the continuation, and that is something called pawn islands. Now, pawn islands, you can probably guess what they are if you don't know already. Basically, this is a pawn island, and this is a pawn island here. They are essentially groups of pawns that are working together, I suppose. Notice here, this is black's pawn island over here, got a one in the middle, and one pawn on its own over there. Generally, the team or the player with the fewer pawn islands, so 2 compared to 3 for black, the person with the fewer islands is normally at an advantage because it's going to be harder for black to defend 3 pawn islands compared to just 2. Okay, so well, what do we do in this position? Pause the video and see if you can come up with not just a first move, but an overriding strategy to make progress in this game. Okay, because we're level on material, but we need to try to get some kind of alternative advantage, not just activity, but also need to press that home eventually. Okay, so pause the video and see if you can work out an idea and strategy. Okay, I think that should be long enough. We're looking here to make sure that all of our pieces are taking part in the game. And especially in the end game, the kings are ultra important. Because notice that a king can control all the 8 squares, I think it is 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, should be 8 squares, rounded, in ways that other pieces can't. The only other piece that can control all the squares rounded is the queen. The king actually, therefore, is very valuable because it can attack at short range. So the first move, king to e2, we need to make sure that king is involved in the game. Black is also doing a similar thing, king to e7. Okay, so the king becomes a fighting piece in the endgame. That's very important to remember. Okay, and again, king d3. You might see I'm sort of rattling through a little bit, but hopefully you've got these moves in mind. King d6. Now, we have now a threat on the board. Black is threatening white's rook. So what should white do? Well, again, pause the video, just have a quick think, and come up with an idea, or perhaps 2 possibilities. Okay, now, I think there's a couple of possibilities here, but I would recommend one move in particular. I would recommend this move, rook to a5. If we, for example, if we moved our king up to protect our rook, then notice that that rook is still, I would say, quite vulnerable. Because what will happen is black will try to swing the rook down to here, attacking our king, forcing the king away, and then black will pick up our rook for free. Okay, so that's something we don't really want to play just yet. So king up here is a good idea, but perhaps just a little too early. Okay. Similarly, I would say the same for this move. This is a move we'll see later in the position, but I would recommend again rook there, and then whoops, putting pressure on this pawn. Again, perhaps I think that's possible as a good alternative. This move b4, but the move that was played was rook a5, attacking this weakness here. So, well, black has to defend. So now is a good time to do a certain move. Again, pause the video. King d4 is the move. Notice that white is doing very well here at the moment because of the activity of his piece. Yes, it is a he, of his pieces, compared to black's slightly passive, supine, you might say, supine pieces. Supine kind of means like they don't really have much they can do, and they'll sort of roll over very quickly. So this rook in particular is really limited. The king is doing all right, but it's limited by the 2 white pieces here. I'm going to rattle through a few moves so that we get to perhaps the most important part of the position. Okay. See if you can follow the plan. Again, you might need to pause the video just to make sure that you're keeping track of it. So after king d4, we have an attack on the right-hand side, on the king side by black. And, well, white decides to reinforce that square. Basically, white wants to make sure that his pieces are as active as possible, which means that this pawn can do the job of the rook. We don't need all 3 pieces now attacking the square. We can delegate, we can hand over the responsibility of this square here to this pawn and use the rook for some other purpose. So rook b8, again, just simply attacking the pawn, but that's nice and easy to defend. We can simply just play a3. Yeah, play the pawn to a3. So that's nice and simple. We'll just defend the pawn. Note that we are sort of slightly blocking our rook in, but we can always get the rook out this way if we need to, so that's not a problem. Black has to go back to a8. Now pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move. I would estimate here that not all of you would manage to get this move because it's quite tricky. Notice that, okay, our pieces are very active. But it's quite hard to make progress, isn't it, at the moment? Because, okay, well, at the moment, we probably have to reroute our rook round or something. If we move our king, well, it's only going to go backwards. So we need now to try to break through. The answer is pawn to e4. Okay, we have to do this. Otherwise, you can't make any progress. We can't win the game, despite our advantage. So obviously, if black doesn't take, then we can then create a pass pawn and then back it up. And I think that would be quite critical for black. That would be quite dangerous for him. So therefore, black just simply swaps off. We are obliged to take, otherwise we lose a pawn. And again, in that situation, the same thing. Okay, so we're back at king. King takes e4, latest move. Well, black is still kind of obliged to defend this pawn. I think a more active strategy might have been to perhaps try to attack the king and then bring the rook down, because rook activity in a rook endgame in particular is vital. It's the most important thing, perhaps on a par with material. If you find yourself, okay, if you're level on material but you haven't got much activity, then you may want to try to consider, well, you may give up a pawn just to get some action, basically, for your rook, and you can counterattack and probably win that pawn back, potentially. So it's a bit like an investment. Rook a7 is, again, very supine, very passive. I don't like this move. King f4, heading across to the king's side. Now we're looking to target this other weakness, potentially. Okay, black doesn't want this. Apologies if I'm rattling through slightly. This is just, I want to get to the point which I feel is really relevant to this. White, again, is trying to break through. Black is simply doing nothing. He can't really do very much because he's pinned down. Here, if black takes, white will recapture with the king and then capture this pawn most likely. So instead, black pushes on, stops white coming back in there. So I'm going to show you the next couple of moves too. So we have, that's after g5, we've got this move, an odd move, g3. The reason is that white doesn't want to allow any counterplay against his king. So it means that perhaps black will try to get in there and get rid of this pawn. But with the pawn here, we're cutting off the squares for black. I'm probably going to just pause this because I want to continue it next week. I'm looking for a new strategy. What are we going to do in order to make progress here? I'm going to rattle through two more moves, and then we're going to get to a position which I kind of want to set you as homework, almost. I'm going to just quickly play the next couple of moves so we can get to an interesting position. Okay, king to e4 now. We want to try to break in to black's camp, like this. Black's not going to allow it. Again, trying to break into black's camp. Not possible. Okay. So here is your homework, if you like. How does white make progress in this position? And that is where we're going to end it. So just, I don't know, do a print screen or something, or put it on your board at home, and maybe I'll reveal the answer next week. Okay. Hopefully that was a little bit useful for you. But remember, I think the most important thing is activity. Piece activity, especially in the endgame, is extremely important. So don't forget that when you get to an endgame, be aware if you're too passive, you may need to try to find ways to change the course of the game and attack the enemy weaknesses. Okay, even at the cost of material. So I'll see you next time and have a think about that position and how to make progress. See you next week.